All right, welcome to another deep dive. This time, you guys have given us quite the challenge.
Yeah.
I mean, we've got geological studies, we've got economic reports, even a deep analysis of indigenous rights, and all of it centered around Greenland.
Yeah.
So get ready, because we're going to uncover a side of Greenland
Yeah.
that most people never get to see.
It really is amazing what's happening, both literally and figuratively, kind of beneath the surface.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And to kick things off, we're starting our deep dive with a couple of 1993 geological studies. They get pretty in-depth, focusing on late Paleozoic plays and the Ravnefchild Formation source rock. I got to admit, those terms were a bit of a head-scratcher for me at first.
Yeah, I can imagine. Late Paleozoic, that just refers to a period of time millions of years ago.
Okay.
But what's really interesting is that it was prime time for the formation of oil and gas deposits.
Oh.
The studies also mention the Ravnefjeld Formation source rock, which is a specific layer of rock known to contain organic matter, the kind that can transform into those valuable hydrocarbons.
So we're not just talking ancient history here. We're talking potential oil and gas reserves hiding under Greenland's ice.
Exactly.
That's kind of crazy.
It is.
What I thought was really interesting is that the researchers, they really looked at the depositional environment and organic geochemistry of these formations. Can you maybe break that down a little bit for those of us who aren't geologists?
Yeah, sure. So they're essentially trying to figure out what the environment was like way back then.
Okay.
What kind of plants and animals existed, how their remains got buried and transformed over millions of years.
Right.
And by analyzing the chemical makeup of the rock, they can determine if those ancient deposits could actually become oil or gas.
That's fascinating. It's like detective work, but on a massive geological scale. We're seeing these little hints of Greenland's economic potential.
Yeah.
And not just from, the usual suspects like fishing or tourism.
Exactly, yeah.
Speaking of economic potential, we also have this Korean economic report. And it puts a spotlight on another resource, minerals.
Yes. This report is incredible. It really zeroes in on Greenland's iron ore resources.
Okay.
Specifically, a massive deposit estimated to contain over 1 billion tons of iron ore. And get this, it's high-grade ore.
Wow.
With significant amounts of titanium dioxide and vanadium pentoxide.
1 billion tons. That's kind of hard to even fathom.
It's a lot.
I mean, we always think of Greenland as this vast, icy expanse, but it sounds like there's a whole lot more going on beneath the surface.
For sure.
What are one of the industrial applications of those minerals?
Well, titanium dioxide, you'll find that in everything from paints and plastics to sunscreen. Vanadium pentoxide, that's a key ingredient in ceramics, and is used as a catalyst in certain chemical processes.
Wow.
So we're talking about resources with huge implications for industries all over the place.
There's this one detail in the report that I found pretty intriguing.
Yeah.
It suggests that the high nickel content in these deposits could actually point to a meteoric origin. How cool is that?
It's a fascinating possibility. If they do have an unusual amount of nickel, it could mean they formed from the debris of a meteorite impact millions of years ago.
So these resources literally fell from the sky. That's not something you hear every day.
No, it's not.
It really makes you wonder what other secrets Greenland might be hiding.
Yeah, definitely. But it's important to remember that Greenland isn't just a source of resources.
Right.
It's a place where people live and whose cultures are intertwined with this land. That's where this academic paper on indigenous rights in the Arctic comes in.
You're right. We can't forget about the people. This paper really dives into the complexities of indigenous rights, particularly for the Inuit and Sami peoples across a bunch of different Arctic nations.
Right.
It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and one thing I find really interesting is how it compares the different approaches to self-determination for these groups.
Yeah.
You've got Denmark, Norway, Canada, U.S., and Russia all dealing with indigenous populations in the Arctic.
Right. But each with their own unique approach.
The paper really highlights the differences between Greenland and Nunavut.
Yeah.
Both regions with large Inuit populations, but with very different models of governance.
Exactly. So Greenland, through its Self-Government Act of 2009, has a much higher degree of autonomy compared to Nunavut, which operates under land claim agreements with Canada.
So two very different approaches.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it really shows that there's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to indigenous rights and self-determination.
Yeah, for sure. It raises so many questions. What are the pros and cons of each approach?
Right.
What factors influence these different models? How do they impact the daily lives of the people living in these regions.
Exactly.
It's such a complex issue. There's no easy answers.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
It's something to think about very carefully as we continue to explore Greenland's evolving story.
Okay, so to really understand Greenland's present, we need to kind of dig into its past. Luckily, you provided us with this awesome resource, Greenland.
It's packed with historical details.
It's a treasure trove of information.
It is. Okay, so picture this. It's the year 982,
Right.
and Eric the Red, a Norse explorer, sets sail for this massive icy land. He ends up landing on the southwestern coast,
Hmm.
and the area was, surprisingly, quite green and fertile at the time.
Yeah. It's believed that Greenland was experiencing a relatively warm climate during that period, enough to allow for some agriculture and even livestock farming.
Which is probably why Eric named it Greenland, maybe to attract more settlers. And for a while it worked. Viking settlements started popping up, and they thrived for a few centuries.
Yeah.
But then Greenland's climate, being as fickle as it is, started to change.
Oh, no.
Temperatures dropped, and those fertile lands became much harder to farm.
It's a powerful reminder of how environmental changes can have huge impacts, even on well-established societies.
Totally. By the 15th century, those Viking settlements had vanished. Probably a combination of factors: the changing climate, dwindling resources, and maybe even conflict with the Inuit, who were arriving around the same time.
Fascinating chapter in Greenland's history,
It is.
and kind of sets the stage for the rise of the Inuit population and the eventual development of modern Greenlandic society.
Absolutely. But Greenland's story doesn't end there. Centuries later, during World War II,
Hmm.
Greenland's strategic location in the North Atlantic made it, well, pretty important place for both the Allied and Axis powers.
Right. It became really important for weather stations and military bases,
Right.
and that strategic importance just continued right into the Cold War era.
But along with all those geopolitical developments, there was something else happening: a growing desire for self-determination among the Greenlandic people. In 1979, they gained home rule from Denmark,
Right.
giving them more control over their internal affairs.
Yeah, huge step.
Yeah, but that was just the beginning.
And in 2009, things really changed with the Self-Government Act,
Right.
which drastically expanded their autonomy. It's an interesting setup where they control domestic affairs, but not defense or foreign policy,
Okay.
unless it's something related to the Arctic.
So it's this complex balancing act, right?
It is.
One foot in each world, kind of navigating this relationship with Denmark while asserting their right to self-governance. And remember that massive iron deposit we talked about?
Oh, yeah.
Control over resources like that is crucial for any independence
Yeah,
movement.
huge factor, for sure.
Speaking of complex political landscapes, we got to talk about that time Donald Trump offered to buy Greenland.
Oh, yeah, how could we forget?
It was 2019.
2019.
It seemed like a totally wild idea at the time, but when you think about it in terms of geopolitics, it kind of starts to make sense.
Absolutely.
So what do you think his motivations were? Was he really just trying to add another trophy to his collection, or is there something more to it?
Well, I think there were probably a lot of factors at play. Access to rare earth minerals was probably a big one.
Okay.
Greenland has huge untapped potential there, and these minerals are essential for all sorts of high-tech industries.
Right, and with China currently controlling the majority of the rare earth market,
Yeah.
it makes sense that other countries would be looking for alternative sources.
Exactly. And then you have this strategic positioning in the Arctic.
Right.
You know, as the ice melts, new shipping routes are opening up,
Mhm.
access to resources is becoming easier. Greenland, right in the middle of the Arctic, becomes really important geopolitically.
It's like a whole new frontier.
Yeah, in a way it is. And of course, there's the whole thing about countering Chinese influence. China's been investing heavily in Greenland,
Right.
which has raised some concerns, especially in the U.S. So Trump's offer, unconventional for sure, but likely driven by a combination of economic, strategic, and geopolitical interests.
It's really fascinating to see how these global power dynamics are playing out in a place like Greenland.
Mhm.
But it's so important to remember that this isn't some abstract geopolitical game.
Right.
Real people live there, and they have their own hopes and dreams for the future. Both Denmark and Greenland rejected Trump's offer,
Yeah.
which I think sends a pretty strong message about self-determination.
Absolutely. It shows that Greenland's not just a pawn in a global power struggle. They have agency and are ready to chart their own path. But even with that growing sense of autonomy, they still face some serious social challenges. The Greenland Chagro source really dives into these issues, and honestly, it's not always an easy read.
Yeah, I mean, the source paints a pretty stark picture of some of the difficulties Greenlandic society faces. One of the most alarming statistics is the high suicide rate, a complex issue with so many contributing factors.
Yeah, it's a very serious and complex issue. Things like isolation, the limited economic opportunities,
Yeah.
the lingering effects of colonialism, all these things contribute to the problem. It highlights how important mental health and social well-being are in Greenland.
For sure.
It needs more attention.
The source also describes Greenland as kind of a closed society. Given its small population and a remote location, it makes sense to some degree. But it also makes you wonder about the challenges of social integration and cultural preservation
Yeah.
in a world that's changing so rapidly.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. You know, they've got this rich cultural heritage they want to preserve,
Right.
but they also need to find ways to engage with the outside world and create opportunities for their people.
And then there's this really disturbing revelation about forced sterilization practices on Greenlandic women during the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, a dark chapter in Greenland's history, and thankfully it's currently under investigation.
It's a shocking reminder of the abuses that can happen, especially under colonial systems. It's crucial these issues are brought to light,
Absolutely.
and those responsible are held accountable.
For sure.
But alongside these challenges, there's also this incredibly vibrant culture and a really strong sense of identity in Greenland. That's what makes this deep dive so captivating. It's not just about the ice and the politics.
Right.
It's about the people and their stories.
Exactly. And, you know, one of the most important aspects of Greenlandic culture is the Greenlandic language.
It's such a fascinating language.
Yes.
And according to our sources, it's not just one language, right?
Right, exactly.
It's divided into three main dialect groups. Kalasut in the west, Tunumisut in the east, and Inukten in the north.
And those dialects can be so different that speakers might have trouble understanding each other. It's like three languages in one.
That's incredible. And like so many indigenous languages around the world, Greenlandic faces the challenge of preservation in an increasingly globalized world. What are some of the things being done to ensure this language stays alive and thriving?
Well, there's this growing movement to really promote and revitalize the language. Actually, one of the symbolic moves towards greater autonomy was shifting away from Danish as the primary language in education and government.
Wow, that's powerful. It really shows how language and identity and self-determination are all tied together.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes you think, what are some other ways Greenland is expressing this unique identity on the world stage?
Well, there are some notable Greenlandic figures who are making a name for themselves in various fields. For example, Jesper Grønkjær, the footballer who played for Chelsea.
Wow, a Premier League star from Greenland? I had no idea.
Yeah. And then there's Rasmus Lerdorf, the creator of PHP, a widely used scripting language for web development.
So we've got sports and technology covered.
And let's not forget Kwapanuk Olsen,
Oh, yeah.
the YouTuber who runs the popular channel Q's Greenland. He showcases Greenlandic culture and life to a global audience.
That's fantastic. It's amazing to see how Greenlandic voices are using these new platforms to share their stories with the world. It really paints a picture of a vibrant and evolving culture, even with all the challenges. But speaking of challenges, we need to get back to the whole Greenland-Denmark relationship.
Right. It's a complex one, a long and often difficult history. While Greenland has gained significant autonomy, there are still those who advocate for full independence.
And from everything we've seen in these sources, the control of resources is a major factor in that debate.
Absolutely. Greenland's vast mineral wealth, particularly those rare earth elements, has become a focal point.
Because if Greenland were to become fully independent,
Right.
they would have full control over those resources, which would be a major economic game changer. What are some of the potential benefits and drawbacks of full independence for Greenland?
Well, on one hand, it could mean a massive economic boost. They could control their resources, negotiate trade deals, and potentially become a major player in the global market for rare earth minerals.
So basically a level of economic freedom they don't have right now.
Exactly.
But what about the downsides? What are some of the risks?
Well, there are concerns about whether Greenland has the infrastructure and the expertise to manage such large-scale resource extraction,
Yeah,
but to do it responsibly and sustainably.
that's a great point. It's a real balancing act between economic opportunity and environmental protection,
It is.
something Greenland will have to handle carefully moving forward. What other challenges do you see?
Well, they would also have to take care of their own defense and foreign policy, which is no small feat. Right now, they rely on Denmark for that, and building up their own capabilities would be a major challenge.
And there's the question of international recognition, right? Would other countries recognize an independent Greenland? Would they be open to establishing diplomatic ties and trade agreements?
Those are all big questions, no easy answers. But it's clear that the debate over independence is going to continue to be a defining issue for Greenland in the coming years.
It really makes you wonder, what would a truly self-sufficient Greenland look like? What kind of society would they build? What role would they play on the global stage?
It's an exciting but uncertain future, and it'll be fascinating to see how it all unfolds. But one thing's for sure, Greenland is at a crossroads. They're trying to find a balance between their traditional culture and the demands of a modern world,
Yeah.
assert their autonomy while navigating complex geopolitical realities, and create a sustainable future for their people while managing this newfound resource wealth.
It's a lot to juggle.
It really is. But you know, what this deep dive has shown me is that Greenland seems ready for the challenge. They're resilient, adaptable, and determined to create a future that reflects their own values and aspirations.
Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
Mm.
We've gone from ancient geological formations to modern geopolitical tensions, from the challenges of social isolation to the vibrancy of Greenlandic culture. It's been quite a journey.
It has.
What are your thoughts so far? What stood out to you the most? What surprised you? What new questions have come up for you? Because ultimately, we want you, the listener, to come away from this not just with facts, but with a deeper understanding of the complexities facing Greenland. We want you to think critically about these issues, to challenge assumptions, and to come to your own conclusions.
Absolutely.
Now, we could probably talk about Greenland for hours,
Oh, easily.
but we are running out of time.
There's always more to learn. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up deep dive sometime.
I'd love that. But before we wrap up, let's switch gears for a moment and talk about something a bit lighter. Greenland in pop culture. Believe it or not, Greenland has shown up in some pretty unexpected places.
Yeah. The Greenland source mentions a few interesting ones. Did you know that in the video game Plague Inc., Greenland is notoriously difficult to infect?
Wait, really? I never even thought about that.
Apparently, it's like a virtual fortress. It's so remote and there's limited travel, making it hard for those virtual diseases to spread.
That's hilarious. So even virtual pandemics can't handle Greenland's isolation.
Nope. And there's the movie Walter Mitty, where Greenland plays a big part in the protagonist's journey of self-discovery.
Oh, I love that movie. The scenery is just stunning.
It really shows off the beauty of Greenland's landscapes.
And for any comic book fans out there, it's worth noting that Captain America, after being frozen for 70 years, was discovered in Greenland.
That's right. So Greenland's become a bit of a pop culture icon, representing everything from isolation and resilience to adventure and mystery.
It's interesting how these pop culture references shape our perceptions of Greenland. But even though it's not an independent nation, Greenland has its own flag, and there's a really cool story behind it.
Oh, yeah. The red and white design was chosen through a public competition back in the 1980s.
It's a great example of Greenland forging its own identity, even within its current political framework. What do the colors stand for?
Red symbolizes the sun, and white represents the ice, two of Greenland's defining features.
Simple, but powerful. And speaking of powerful, did you know Greenland also has its own coat of arms?
Oh, yeah. It features a polar bear, a symbol of strength and resilience, on a blue background representing the Arctic Ocean.
A fitting emblem for a land that has weathered so many storms.
Absolutely.
And let's not forget about Greenland's national anthem, Nunarput Yudokorswen Goravit,
A beautiful song.
which, if I'm being honest, I cannot pronounce.
It translates to our country, who's become so old, reflecting the deep connection between the people and their ancient land.
A reminder that despite the influences of other cultures, Greenland has held on to its unique identity. And that identity is expressed in so many ways, from their language and music to their art and food.
It's a truly multifaceted culture.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Greenland, I think it's safe to say we've only scratched the surface.
There's so much more to learn about its geology, its untapped resources, the complexities of its political future.
But I think most importantly, we've gotten a glimpse into the heart of Greenland, where resilience, adaptability, and a deep connection to the land are at the core of the human experience.
And I really hope this deep dive has encouraged you, our listener, to continue learning and exploring this incredible part of the world.
Because as we always say on the deep dive, the journey of discovery never truly ends.
So keep those questions coming, keep your minds open, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Greenland. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.
Yeah, access to those rare earth minerals was a big one.
Hmm.
Greenland has a lot of untapped potential in that area, and they're critical for all sorts of high-tech industries.
Right. And with China kind of dominating that market right now, it makes sense that other countries would be looking elsewhere.
For sure. And then on top of that, you've got the whole strategic positioning thing in the Arctic.
Right.
As the ice melts, new shipping routes open up, access to resources is getting easier. And Greenland, with its location right smack in the middle of all that, becomes super important geopolitically.
Yeah, it's like a whole new world opening up there.
In a way, yeah. And then there's the countering Chinese influence angle, too.
Right.
China has been investing a lot in Greenland in recent years, which has raised some eyebrows, especially in the U.S. So Trump's offer, while a little out there, was probably motivated by a bunch of things: economic, strategic, geopolitical, all rolled into one.
Yeah, it's interesting how these global power dynamics play out in a place like Greenland. But it's important to remember this isn't just some kind of game with countries moving pieces around on a board.
Right.
These are real people's lives, and they have their own hopes and dreams for the future.
Yeah.
Denmark and Greenland, they both rejected Trump's offer pretty soundly,
Yeah, they did.
which I think says a lot about their commitment to self-determination.
Absolutely. It shows that Greenland's not just a pawn to be bought and sold. They have their own say in things. They're in the driver's seat and they want to make their own choices. But even with all that growing sense of autonomy, Greenland still faces some serious social challenges, and our Greenland Jono source really gets into some of those issues. And honestly, it's not always easy to read.
Yeah, some of it's tough. The source paints a pretty stark picture of the difficulties that people in Greenland are facing. One of the most alarming stats is the high suicide rate, which is a complex issue with so many factors at play.
It's heartbreaking, and there are a lot of things that contribute to it. Isolation, the lack of economic opportunities, the effects of colonialism. It all adds up, and it really underscores the need to focus on mental health and social well-being in Greenland.
Absolutely. The source also calls Greenland a closed society, which, given its small population and how remote it is, kind of makes sense. But it also raises questions about social integration and preserving their culture, especially with the world changing so fast.
It's a tough balance to strike. They have this rich cultural heritage they want to protect, but they also have to find ways to connect with the wider world and create opportunities for their people.
Right. And then there's the issue of forced sterilization that happened to Greenlandic women
Yeah.
in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
It's a really dark part of Greenland's history, and it's good that it's currently being investigated.
Definitely a very serious issue.
It's a reminder of the kinds of abuses that can occur, particularly under colonial systems. It's essential that we bring those things to light and hold those responsible accountable.
Absolutely. But even with all these challenges, there's this amazing culture and such a strong sense of identity in Greenland. That's what makes this deep dive so interesting. It's not just about the ice and the politics.
Right.
It's about the people and their stories.
Exactly. And one of the coolest parts of Greenlandic culture is their language.
Absolutely.
It's a fascinating language. And from what I understand, it's not just one language, but three main dialects. Kalaallisut in the west, Tunumisut in the east, and Inluktan in the north.
That's right. And they're so different that people speaking different dialects might have trouble understanding each other. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's incredible. And just like so many indigenous languages around the world, Greenlandic is facing the challenge of staying alive in a world that's becoming more and more globalized. What are they doing to make sure their language doesn't disappear?
Well, there's a growing movement to promote and revitalize the language. One of the big symbolic acts as they move towards more autonomy was shifting away from Danish as the main language in schools and government.
Wow, that's a powerful statement. It really shows how language is connected to identity and self-determination. It makes you wonder how else Greenland is expressing its unique identity on the world stage.
Well, there are a few Greenlandic folks who are making waves in different areas, like Jesper Grønkjær, the footballer who played for Chelsea.
A Premier League player from Greenland. That's amazing.
Yeah, and then there's Rasmus Lerdorf, the guy who created PHP, the scripting language for web development.
So we've got sports and tech covered. Who else should we know about?
Oh, how about Quapanuk Olsen, the YouTuber who runs the channel Q's Greenland. He's sharing Greenlandic culture and life with the whole world.
It's amazing to see Greenlandic voices finding these new platforms to share their stories. It really highlights the energy of this vibrant and evolving culture, even with all the challenges they face. But speaking of challenges, we've got to circle back to the relationship between Greenland and Denmark.
Right. It's definitely complicated, a long history with a lot of ups and downs. And even though Greenland has gained more and more autonomy, there are still people who want full independence.
Then from everything we've seen in these sources, the issue of who controls the resources plays a huge role in that debate.
Absolutely. Greenland's mineral wealth, especially those rare earth elements, is front and center in discussions about their future.
Because if Greenland becomes independent,
Yeah.
they would have total control over those resources, and that could be a game changer economically.
Yeah.
So what are some of the pluses and minuses of full independence for Greenland?
Well, on the one hand, it could mean a huge boost to their economy. They could manage their own resources, negotiate their own trade deals, and maybe even become a major player in the global market for rare earth minerals.
So basically a level of economic freedom they don't have right now.
Exactly. But there are also some concerns, like whether Greenland has the infrastructure and the know-how to handle large-scale resource extraction, but to do it in a way that's responsible and sustainable.
Yeah, that's a valid concern. It's a balancing act for sure. Trying to find the sweet spot between opportunity and protecting the environment, something Greenland will have to consider very carefully as they move forward. What other potential problems do you see?
Well, they would have to take on their own defense and foreign policy, which is a big undertaking. They rely on Denmark for that now, and building up those capabilities on their own would be a huge challenge.
And then there's the whole issue of international recognition. Will other countries acknowledge an independent Greenland?
Exactly.
Will they be willing to work with them and create trade agreements?
Big questions and no easy answers, but one thing's clear. This whole debate about independence isn't going away. It's going to be a major theme in Greenland's future.
It really gets you thinking, what would a truly independent Greenland look like? What kind of society would they create? What would their role be in the world?
It's exciting to think about, but also uncertain. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out, but one thing's for sure, Greenland is at a turning point. They're trying to find that balance between their traditions and the modern world, assert their independence while dealing with complex global politics and create a good future for their people, all while managing this new wealth from their resources.
It's a lot to handle.
It really is, but you know what this deep dive has shown me? That Greenland seems up to the challenge. They're resilient, they're adaptable, and they're determined to build a future that's true to their values and what they want.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive, from ancient geology to modern-day geopolitics, from the problems of isolation to the richness of Greenlandic culture. It's been quite a ride. What are your thoughts so far? What has really stuck with you? What surprised you? What new questions have you come up with? Because ultimately, we want you, the listener, to walk away from this with more than just a bunch of facts. We want you to really understand the complicated situation Greenland is in. We want you to think critically about these things, to question your assumptions and come to your own conclusions.
I agree.
We could talk about Greenland for hours and hours,
Oh, yeah, easily.
but we are running out of time.
Always more to learn. Maybe we'll have to do a follow-up deep dive sometime.
I would love that. But before we finish up, let's switch gears a little and talk about something more fun. Greenland and pop culture. Believe it or not, Greenland has popped up in some pretty unexpected places.
It has the Greenland source mentions a few. Did you know that in the video game, Plague Inc. Greenland is super hard to infect?
No way, really. I
Yeah.
never thought about that.
Apparently, it's like a fortress in the game. It's so remote, and travel is limited, which makes it really tough for those virtual diseases to spread.
That's hilarious. So
Okay.
even virtual pandemics can't conquer Greenland's isolation.
Nope. And then there's the movie Walter Mitty, where Greenland is a big part of the main character's journey of self-discovery.
Oh, I love that movie. This scenery is just incredible.
It really showcases the beauty of Greenland's landscapes.
And for any comic book fans out there, did you know that Captain America, after being frozen for 70 years, was found in Greenland?
That's right. So you see, Greenland has become a bit of a pop culture symbol representing isolation, resilience, adventure, mystery, all kinds of things.
It's interesting how those pop culture references shape how we see Greenland. But even though it's not an independent country, Greenland has its own flag, and it's got a pretty cool backstory.
Yeah, back in the 80s, they held a public competition to design the flag, and they chose this red and white design.
It's a great example of Greenland creating its own identity, even within the current political situation. What do the colors symbolize?
The red stands for the sun, and the white stands for the ice. Two of the most important features of Greenland's landscape.
Simple but powerful. And speaking of powerful, did you know Greenland also has its own coat of arms?
Oh, yeah. It's
Yeah.
got a polar bear, a symbol of strength and resilience, set against a blue background representing the Arctic Ocean.
A very fitting symbol for a place that's faced so many challenges.
It is.
And let's not forget Greenland's national anthem, Nunarput Utokorswangaravit.
Beautiful song.
I'm going to be honest, I can't even pronounce that.
It translates to "our country who's become so old," which shows the deep connection between the Greenlandic people and their ancient land.
A reminder that even with the influences of other cultures, Greenland has kept a strong sense of its own unique identity. And you see that expressed in so many ways, from their language and music to their art and their food.
Yeah, it's a multi-layered culture.
As we wrap up this deep dive into Greenland, I think it's safe to say that we've only scratched the surface.
So much more to uncover about their geology, their untapped resources, their complex political future.
But most importantly, we've gotten a look into the heart of Greenland, a place where resilience, adaptability, and a deep connection to the land are at the core of what it means to be human.
And I really hope this deep dive has inspired you, the listener, to keep learning and exploring this amazing part of the world.
Because like we always say on the deep dive, the journey of discovery never really ends.
So keep those questions coming, keep your minds open, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Greenland. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.
Yeah, it really makes you think. You know how often we just kind of make these assumptions about places based on what we think we know?
Totally.
This whole deep dive has really changed how I think about Greenland.
Me too. It's a good reminder to look past what you see on the surface and really dig deeper.
For sure.
So where do you think things go from here for Greenland? What's next for this place and its people?
That's the big question, isn't it? I mean, they're at this really crucial point in their history. They've got this new global attention, partly because of their resources and their location in the Arctic, which is changing so fast. But they're also dealing with these tough social issues and trying to find a way to build a future that's sustainable and fair for everyone.
It's like they're walking this tightrope, you know?
Yeah.
Trying to balance tradition and becoming more modern, figuring out how much autonomy they want while still being connected to the rest of the world and weighing economic opportunities against protecting the environment. There's no easy answer, no clear path forward. But I think that's what makes their story so interesting.
I agree. It's a story about resilience, adapting to change, and never giving up. And I think there's a lot we can all learn from that, no matter where we live or what challenges we face.
Absolutely. It reminds us that the world is full of complicated situations.
It is.
And if we really want to understand them, we have to be curious and open-minded and willing to question what we think we know.
And that's what the deep dive is all about, isn't it? Encouraging that curiosity and open-mindedness and giving people the tools to think critically.
Exactly. So to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive into Greenland has sparked your own curiosity and given you a new way of looking at this amazing part of the world.
Remember, this is just the starting point. There's always more to learn, more to discover, and more to talk about. So keep asking those questions, keep challenging what you think you know, and keep exploring the world around you.
Thanks for joining us in this deep dive into Greenland. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.